Good afternoon. On behalf of the University of California, thank you for tuning in today for the February 2023 edition of the UC Alumni Career Network. My name is Joel Raznick. I have the great honor of serving as a UC Alumni Regent Designate. I am an alumnus of UC Santa Barbara, and I serve on the UC Santa Barbara Board of Directors, as well as on the UC Santa Barbara Foundation Board as a trustee. I'm honored to be the moderator today of this event focused on creating inclusive workspaces. This program is a part of a UC-wide effort to unite and support alumni across our 10 campuses. We aim to equip you with the information, insights, and connections necessary to launch, grow, and expand your career. During today's session, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of our speakers by clicking on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will try to answer as many questions as possible during the event. I am pleased to be joined by inspiring UC alumni. Today, joining from Dublin, California, is Phil Tucker Jr. Phil is a senior manager at Airbnb, where he leads roadmap governance, designs enterprise-scale frameworks for strategic planning, drives product development, and ways of working for the payments business operation team within global operations. Originally from Los Angeles, California, Phil graduated from UC Santa Barbara in 2006 with degrees in business economics and psychology. While at UCSB, he was very involved on campus as an active member of the Black Student Union, co-founding a proactive leadership development program, and serving as co-leader of the Black Pioneers Renaissance Organization. He now serves on the board of directors for UC Santa Barbara's Alumni Association. It's Phil's belief that the most profound intellectual and spiritual growth comes from service to others. In his professional career, Phil has leveraged many opportunities to lead employee resource groups. While at Visa, he served as a co-lead of the group, Visa Black Employees, for 4 years, and he is currently a sponsorship village advisor at Airbnb. Phil has focused his efforts to positively impact his community by fostering a diverse and inclusive workspace and driving corporate philanthropy and investment for underserved communities. He is most proud of aiding underprivileged youth in their pursuit of third-level education and creating professional opportunities for underrepresented minorities. Welcome, Philip.
Thank you.
Sure. Tuning in from Santa Barbara, California, is Carrie Hutchinson. Dr. Hutchinson is a professor, author, trainer, and a community organizer with a PhD from the University of California, Santa Barbara in Communication Studies. Dr. Hutchinson's research and publications examine the intersection of social identities with a focus on race and gender. She describes her life's work as emboldening everyday people to find their place in the movement for social change. She co-founded the Santa Barbara chapter of the national organization Showing Up for Racial Justice, which seeks to compel people with racial privilege to join multiracial movements for racial justice with effectiveness and accountability. Dr. Hutchinson is a tenured professor in the communications department at Santa Barbara City College, where she teaches interpersonal communications and leadership for a global society. She designed and teaches the Equity Mindset Series, an entirely free certificate program to help people from all backgrounds get up to speed on issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, and identify the ways in which they can actively participate as change agents for a better world. She co-owns Ally to Accomplice, a training and consulting firm focused on developing employee racial literacy and fostering cultural affirming workplaces. You can learn more about her at carriehutchinson.com. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Super great. So Phil and Carrie, thank you both so much for being on today's panel. Without further ado, why don't we dive into the questions? First, let's start with some questions about your career. Phil, we'd love to learn about your career's journey and how you got involved with developing workplace inclusion programs.
Thank you so much for that question, Joel, and I'm very excited to be here and participate. After graduating at UC Santa Barbara, my career journey began at Blackhawk Network. And it was a wholly owned subsidiary of Safeway. And at the time, Blackhawk was a small organization and they didn't have any real affinity groups or employee resource groups. But because it was a wholly owned subsidiary of Safeway, I had access to their Safeway African American Leadership Network. And it was called SALIN. And it was my first exposure to an employee resource group. And there I learned a lot about how employees could come together and share their experiences, their backgrounds, and provide a safe place to have conversations around challenges that they were having both internal within the organization as well as external to the organization. And through that experience, I was afforded many like management accelerator opportunities. One of them being participation in executive leadership councils, mid-level manager symposium. And when I was there, it just totally opened my aperture for what was possible in terms of the career opportunities and exposure. And through that experience, I learned about personal branding. I learned about mentors. I learned about sponsors, what the difference is. And there are significant differences between mentorship and sponsorship. And it really inspired me to want to continue to use the organization as a way to drive investment back into the communities that we served, as well as to create professional development opportunities in the way of recruitment and retention. So post my experience at Blackhawk Network, I was actively seeking those environments at Visa. And it was a little bit of a reset that the organization was going through in terms of looking for leaders. And I put my hand up and spoke to the council sponsors and the executive leadership team for that group, and was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to lead. And we focused a lot on developing Heritage Month programming for Black History Month, as well as supporting the talent organization's goals around recruitment, retention, and professional development.
Great.
And now at Airbnb, excited to continue to build on those learnings and open source and share what worked well in terms of management accelerator programs, and really to support our diversity and belonging goals here at Airbnb.
Thank you, Philip. Appreciate you sharing your journey. Carrie, will you share your career journey and what drew you to justice work and building your consulting firm, as well as building your consulting firm Ally to Accomplice?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for each of us, the things that lead us to our passions in life can be kind of non-linear. There's just a variety of experiences and exposures in our lives that have a really intense impact on us and our worldview and the way we think. And there were a variety of those things leading up to the time that I spent as a graduate student at UCSB in Santa Barbara, where I was studying communication, my discipline, and I was studying interpersonal communication, but from a standpoint of relationships, romantic relationships in particular, and family relationships. And I was introduced to an area of my discipline called intergroup communication. And for me, this was one of the greatest light bulb moments of my life, when it really helped explain to me all of the struggles in the world, in our society, and our culture, and on our planet. And I felt like I could use this larger umbrella concept to continue my passion for interpersonal relationship, but also expand my passion to look at various other social problems and really take a communication studies lens to look at those problems. So I ended up doing a cognate, kind of a double major in communication and psychology, and focusing on perceptual biases and how these impact our relationships with other people, our perceptions of people, especially from outgroups such as gender and racial outgroups. But what I was doing, I realized at some point, was this thing that folks from my background tend to do, which is over-intellectualizing topics of social justice and change agency. And when I became a teacher and started teaching college students, I felt like I was having a great impact on young people, and I still continue to do that. It's one of my huge passion areas. But I also felt like I wanted to take these concepts out of the scholarly realm and out of the classroom and into into the world where I lived and existed. And this kind of coalesced with other things that were happening in my life. One of those things being that at my place of employment, we were exploring issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I was feeling quite dissatisfied with the way that trainings and various approaches were being taken, especially because it was my background and my area of expertise. And every time I got myself into a training, I thought, gosh, this is not coming from best practices for attitudinal and behavioral change from social science. And it's quite frustrating to me. I shared those frustrations with a colleague who had the same frustrations. And also at the same time, I was building my family. I have a multiracial family, and my children were experiencing a lot of things in the K through 12 elementary system. So all these things together really ignited my passion to want to take my scholarly expertise and take it out into the world by building my experience as a community organizer, and then taking that experience and building it into a consulting firm where we could actually talk to organizations and really try to get major change occurring right now, as opposed to in the future.
Well, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing your path. Why don't we talk about ERGs? Phil, can you tell us what are resource and employee resource groups and the role they can play in fostering inclusive work environments, and tell us a little bit about your experience with these groups and other leadership groups.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Joel. So employee resource groups really began as like affinity groups and providing a safe place for people of similar backgrounds to create opportunities for connection, safety, fellowship, and as I mentioned earlier, addressing areas of common concern.
Mhm.
And if you think about that, when you have those safe environments and you can cultivate professional development within these groups, it offers a really unique value to an organization. And that value is it helps people become more of their authentic selves in the workplace. And the reason that that's important and valuable to any organization is because it unlocks diversity of thought. And it does that by allowing people to basically bring the benefits of their inherent diversity, all the attributes of who you are and what you're born with, as well as your acquired diversity. And when you package those things together, you can start to bring your full self to the workplace. And as organizations think about innovation and think about unlocking that next really valuable idea, it requires you to challenge assumptions. And so diversity of thought inherently allows you to avoid homogeneous thinking, where everybody around the table has their same or similar background and experience. And that's really a business risk. And so what these organizations do by empowering people to be more of themselves is also support talent goals around recruitment, support talent goals around retention, and then also for some organizations that are even more advanced, even help inform product decisions and maybe even policy decisions tied to products and services.
Great, thank you. Why don't we talk about the evolution of ally to accomplice? That's very interesting. And what is an ally and an accomplice? Carrie, can you speak to that?
Yes, I'm happy to speak to that. It's one of my favorite things to speak about. And so I'm going to go ahead and share some slides because it does help me keep focused in this rare opportunity I get to share out this information. I want to make sure I cover everything. Mm-hmm. So before I talk about what I put together, which are basically kind of 5 major considerations for allies in the room, I just want to mention that when we're talking about allyship, we're talking about a variety of types of oppression and where we can serve as allies across a spectrum of social inequities. And so today, I think Phil and I are really focusing mostly on diversity, equity, inclusion around issues of racism and practicing anti-racism. And I'm talking about allyship in that context. But when we use an anti-racism lens in the work that I do, it's something that can apply to any type of dismantling of any type of oppression, and it refers to any type of allyship. So as I talk about this, I will be referring a lot to racial oppression, but I want to make sure that we know we're talking about the fact that anybody can be an ally for any group to which they don't belong. But before we get to that, you asked what is an ally, and it's really important that we clarify this term because it's so popular and people use it, and it's gotten a lot of pushback because an ally gives the impression that you're a person standing alongside other people in their struggle. And instead, we want to really reframe the idea of allyship into thinking more about accomplice-ship, meaning that you are an accomplice or a co-conspirator co-conspirator in this movement. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is. And that's what my first point about practicing allyship. So I use this term practicing allyship because I want to emphasize that allyship is a practice and it's not a label. So we can never really self-identify ourselves as allies because it's up to the folks in the marginalized group that we're attempting to collaborate with to determine whether or not our behavior and our outlook and our worldview represents good allyship. So it's really a practice and not a label. And so we want to shift from this ally or standing alongside mindset and really get directly in the fight. And to do that, we have to learn a little bit more about why we have skin in the game. So I'm going to talk about that next, but I want to remind everybody of the safety pin movement. And this is a perfect example of where allyship fails. This was when, various issues occurred years ago, and folks were self-determining themselves to be allies by putting on safety pins and saying that I am a safe person, I am a safe space. But we can't really put on a safety pin and tell others that we're safe. It's for them to determine whether we're people who they consider supportive in this movement. So I want to reflect on the quote by Dr. Eden X. Kendi from How to Be an Anti-Racist, where he says, racist and anti-racist are not fixed identities. We can be racist in 1 minute and anti-racist the next. What we say about race, what we do about race in each moment determines what we are. So that's just something to think about in terms of the practice of allyship rather than the label. So the second of my 5 kind of greatest hits of allyship that I'm going to share with you today is this concept of operating from mutual interest. And for anybody seeking to practice allyship, it's really important to understand, again, that we're not operating alongside a group for their behalf, but rather we're operating from the mindset that systems of oppression dehumanize us all. And so if I live in a world where I allow racism to happen in front of my face, or I don't speak out against transphobia or sexism or any other form of oppression, I'm oppressing myself by continuing to allow systems of oppression and systems of domination and a culture where I live. And those things ultimately come back to me. So Lilla Watson, she's an Indigenous activist, and she sums it up the best I've ever heard by saying, if you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together. So this is the idea of saying that we can only really work together when we understand that we're collectively working on our shared liberation from all systems of oppression. So that's my second piece. A third real important thing to keep in mind if you're seeking to practice allyship is really understanding where your influence lies and where you have power. So it is super important for us to develop community with all people and to develop cross-racial communities and multiracial communities. But one thing that aspiring allies tend to forget is that their greatest sphere of influence is within their own racial peer groups. And this is why I love the study of intergroup communication, because it really emphasizes to us that we have the most influence with people who are similar to us. So folks who are similar to us are more likely to listen to us than they are to listen to people from the out group. And because of that, we've got to make sure that we're not only developing multiracial communities and communities with the directly oppressed groups, but also within our own racial peer groups, really modeling allyship and modeling the things that we would like for them to embody so that we can work together and influence each other in positive ways. So Alicia Garza, one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, wants to emphasize on this point that we can't be afraid to establish a base that is larger than the people we feel comfortable with. So this means extending beyond our immediate circles of influence and dealing with people who are in our racial peer groups that we may not agree with on all points, but we still have greater access to them and greater ability to influence them. So moving right along here, I don't want to take too much time, but there's two last pieces here. And one is embracing imperfection. So one huge area of growth for me, in fact, I would say it's my greatest area of growth in my community organizing work, is that we can't recreate the conditions that we wish to eradicate. So we're seeking to dismantle all forms of oppression. And in doing that, we can't oppress each other, because once we do that, we're just recreating these very conditions. So I always use the statement that perfectionism is oppressive. And in this work, we're going to be a little messy. We're going to be highly imperfect. We will be criticized. We will make amends, and we have to keep going. But it's not a reason to stop just because we're not doing it perfectly. And then, of course, the last piece that I want to share is that allyship means active participation. So we can't just learn all about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then say that we know everything. And we can't then, as I spoke about earlier, deem ourselves an ally, but instead we have to be actively participating and actively doing things in order to be considered an ally and somebody who's really participating in the movement for social change. So you've heard it before, and I'll say it. Dr. Angela Davis says, in a racist society, it's not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist, and anti-racism is a behavior and a practice that we have to do every day. So Beverly Daniel Tatum gives the analogy that works really well for people, that we are all basically on an airport walkway. It is moving toward the future, and it is a walkway of systems of oppression that if we don't do things to reverse it and to change it, it will just continue forward the way that it is. And without direct and explicit action, nothing is going to change. So as Phil reflected about the various methods and ways that that he embodies these practices at work, all of us need to be doing that in our workplaces and our organizations to make sure that change is actually happening. Otherwise, we're going to stay on that walkway and nothing is ever going to change. So those are just a couple things that I like to emphasize when I'm talking to people about their role in the movement and the ways that they can think about it differently in order to be most effective.
Well, that's terrific. You make so many important points. It's a great learning, and I appreciate that you put together a consultancy to help others, to share this information. But some terrific points. Thank you.
Thank you.
Phil, on Ally, can you talk about what steps people can take to create safer spaces for everyone at work?
Yeah, I think when you consider creating safer spaces at work, it starts with bringing your authentic self and expressing vulnerability. I think when you deepen interpersonal relationships by taking the time to learn about somebody's background and their experience, and there is a fine line, as Dr. Hutchinson mentions, whether you don't want to dump all that work on the person that you're trying to engage with, but you seek to just be open and learn and lead with grace. And understand that you won't always get it right is critical to how you develop those relationships. And when I think about allyship and how that's practiced in the workplace, there are things that folks can do to really sponsor their colleagues. They can speak their name when they aren't around, endorse them publicly, invite them to high-profile meetings, share their career goals with decision makers, not just with folks who may not be able to help accelerate their journey. Recommending them for stretch assignments and even speaking opportunities that can allow them to showcase their brand, maybe outside of their management structure, and have exposure to different parts of an organization. Sometimes somebody may be stuck in their journey because they have a manager that's not really extending their brand to help that person grow. And so a unique thing an ally can do is invite that person into that space, take the time to learn more about their passions, their interests, and help find a fit within their organization or different places within the organization so that they can continue to advance their career. And I would say that, when you create those opportunities for somebody, let them know. It's really healthy when you create win-win situations where you unlock opportunities for somebody. And then in that new role, they can actually champion your ability to do that. It actually says a lot about managers who help folks grow from within their organization as opposed to just protecting those valued resources.
Thank you. I appreciate all of that. And it's, it sounds very much about you're speaking to one-to-one relationships and about supporting one another and building that throughout your organization. And I appreciate all of those points. Carrie, let's talk about how to get started. Many people want to be allies in the workplace, but they don't know how to do it. Could you give us some suggestions on how to do that, how to get started?
I want to reflect on what Phil talked about a little bit in terms of the interpersonal relationships and the dynamics at work. But the biggest question that I do get that you mentioned, Joel, is people say, everybody wants to be a good person. Everyone wants to help. Everyone wants to be an ally. So I'm coming here from the assumption that these are folks who are interested in doing more and interested in making a difference. And so I feel people coming to me and they really seem to have this what they call kind of like paralysis by analysis, which is this idea that there's too much to do. It's overwhelming. Where do you start? I need clear direction. So I use this model of social change, which tends to appeal to folks really trying to find their place. And if you see the model here, it has these 4 levels. And so this kind of parses out the different levels at which we can try and make social change. And the idea here is that we can't do everything in all these levels all the time, but there's always something we can be doing in one of these levels, and different opportunities present themselves for us to be doing work at these various levels. So what I did, I put the model up here, I'm going to describe it to you. And then at each level, I have a link to a resource that will help you consider and get started at that level. And those are in the external resources that will be shared at the end. So you don't need to bother writing this down. They'll be shared at the end of the webinar. But just to describe these different levels of oppression and social change, we start with the ideological level, and that is the level at which we're all operating, which establishes the norms in our culture. One of the reasons we're focusing so much on allies today is because our workplaces are still dominated by people who possess dominant social identities across groups, right? So we're talking about people of white European descent, we're talking about men, we're talking about cisgender people, and people without disabilities. And so the majority of our workplaces still have dominant numbers of people in those groups. And so that means our workplaces are populated with folks who can serve as allies. So it's one of the reasons that we're speaking a lot to that audience today. So at the ideological level, we're examining, what are the values that we consider to be normal, the workplace behaviors that we've normalized and kind of forced other groups and people to assimilate into. And can we take a deep dive into those and examine a little more closely where they came from, what policies and procedures and practices at work are uplifting and adhering, making us adhere to those, even though they may not be the practices that have the best results for our organization. So at the ideological level, we're really examining dominant cultural values, how those are infused into our workplace, and what we can do to have more inclusive values in the workplace. And I included a resource here that you'll want to look at later, and it talks about white dominant cultural values in the workplace and some other options for ways that we can start being more inclusive. Then you've got the institutional level, and I just reflect a little bit on that. Those are the policies and practices in our organizations. And the main recommendation that we make at the institutional level is that an organization go through what we call an equity audit. And this is a really intimate look at a variety of things in the organization. It's not just a matter of diversity. Of course, it includes having a diverse workforce, but it also includes the climate of that workforce, which will influence the ability to retain a diverse group of employees. And so we want to take a look at what's going on in the workplace in terms of policies, practices, and procedures, how we can change and shift those to make a more inclusive workplace. And then, of course, we've got the interpersonal level, and that's what Phil was talking about in relationships with other people. Do we have the skills that it takes to have cross-racial relationships that are effective and accountable and inclusive? Do we have the ability to talk to our own same race peers and influence people in our spheres of influence, like I talked about earlier? There are skills that are required in order to do that effectively. Everyone here is probably very familiar with the conversations in our culture right now about calling in versus calling out, when you should do one or the other. And of course, there's many situations that require calling out. As a community organizer, I'm very aware of those, and I do pretty well with a megaphone. But I also recognize that one of the more effective ways to have influence is to call people in when they're really seeking to change, and what are the interpersonal skills we can develop in order to help us do that. And then lastly is the intrapersonal level, and that means within ourselves. And so this is where we really deal with our own biases, and we reflect on ways to change our mindset so that we're not engaging in methods of oppression that we're unaware that we're even engaging in because of our own implicit biases. And I included a great resource there to a podcast series called Outsmarting Implicit Bias. And this is by one of the researchers who kind of developed the concept of the implicit bias association test. And you can take a look at that online. So these are just some of the spheres of influence and ways that we can make social change through these 4 levels. And as I started, if there's not something we can be doing at one of these levels, there's something we can be doing at another one of these levels. I don't think it'd be an exaggeration to say that every day of my life, I'm able to do something that has impact and that's effective in one of these levels when it comes to trying to create social change. So I invite everybody to really think about the places where they can make change and look at it from this framework if it's helpful.
Thank you, Carrie. And there's a lot there. There's a lot to digest and to process and to think about. You've presented both tactical and conceptual ways to think about and to act. And I appreciate it. I have myself thought about how to go from idea to action. And I think you've outlined, there's a lot for us to, on many levels, for us to think about and to act on. So thank you. Why don't we talk about how to ensure that it's genuine for both of you, Phil and for Carrie? A lot of organizations have attempted to launch initiatives and DEI campaigns that come off as performative. How do you ensure that the work is authentic, meaningful, and sustainable?
I'm happy to jump in and start on that question. Budgets reflect values. So one of the things that I've always been interested in is how the organization is funding the ERGs. How are they funding maybe external organizations? Speaking from my personal experience, I've always been very fortunate where the organizations I've been a part of have also supported my 501c work external to the organization in the way of fundraising dollars, in the way of helping make financial education materials available, the way that organizations take into account product design feedback from the communities that they serve. Those are all really important components for how organizations not only show up, but continue to show up. I think having ambitious goals around what that looks like in terms of a DEI environment and communicating that internally to your employee base is extremely important. I think if you consider performance management in terms of what talent you acquire, asking if somebody has done ERG or DEI work as a part of consideration on whether they may be the right person for that role so that it becomes ingrained in a part of the culture is also very valuable. And I'll also say that part of demonstrating, at least to employees within an organization, that this is meaningful and sustainable is actually being really responsive to employee feedback. Because I think one of the things that's very challenging is you may take the time to send out a survey to take the temperature and understand where employees are at, how they feel about the organization's contributions. But if the organization doesn't act on that information, then that starts to erode trust and confidence that the commitment is truly there. So what I would say is you really have to continue to test, measure, and engage your employee base so you can learn the best ways to show up internally within the organization. And then I think sustaining that engagement effort and talking publicly about that is also really important to building that confidence outside the organization.
Yeah, that's great. What I'm hearing is, building in processes, budget, and responsiveness, building metrics is really what you're saying is creating an environment for accountability. Carrie, I'm sure we'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, just to echo everything Phil said, I agree wholeheartedly with all of those measures, and that those are the things that we need to do to make this meaningful work in our organizations, and especially to underscore his statement about budget. Organizations will put money toward the things that matter to them. That is a fact. And so when they're unwilling or reluctant to put sufficient money toward making their workplaces more inclusive, that sends a message. And so I always like to know exactly how important it is to an organization by trying to see what they're willing to do. We always ask in our kind of initial assessment meetings, we ask upper management, how they believe their employees would answer the question, do you feel welcome in your workplace? Is this an inclusive workplace for you? And it's interesting the variety of reactions we get to that, because on the one hand, you have a lot of upper management who are out of touch with the climate in the workplace because the folks who are most dissatisfied are not at the upper management level sometimes. But on the other hand, what we get more frequently than that is kind of a, they're kind of stunned into recognition that there are problems that need to be acknowledged in the workplace. And when we suggest doing an equity audit, it can be a little bit scary because a lot of times those problems are going to reflect back on the folks running the organization. But it is required to take a deep dive, like Phil said, into the climate, to assess employees and to really get their perspective. Without doing that, you just can't take the word for the folks at the top of an organization about how it feels to work in that workplace, and really can't offer anything that's going to make change unless we take the temperature of that change. And then I think also Phil mentioned assessment, longitudinally. So we have to come back and make sure that the things that we've tried to do to make it better in these workplaces are really working, and continue to assess, reevaluate, restructure, and do it over and over again. Because issues are always going to be there, and we're not just going to be done with this work at some point. It's another thing, I didn't include this in the greatest sense of allyship, that the recognition that this work is never done is one of the most important things that we can embrace in order to make it sustainable and keep our momentum. We're just, we're not looking for that finish line because it may never come. So instead, we keep working for the long haul.
Terrific, thank you. Throughout the conversation, it strikes me that while there is very much in many areas a desire to be ally, a desire for corporations, for individuals, a desire to bring change, there's often a lack of knowledge of how to do it. And I think that throughout this conversation, you have both shared very specific. It's great to have a framework. It's great to have a construct to think about how to move forward, and that you're both sharing that, and I very much appreciate it. So that's the end of our questions for both Carrie and Phil. In a few minutes, we'll begin to address questions from the audience. Please remember to submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. As you're doing that, I just want to mention how much I appreciate being a part of this conversation, how much I appreciate the University of California for focusing on these issues, creating a forum and related issues, creating a forum for the conversation and for an open dialogue. As I think through it, and I'm learning more as we talk today, allyship seems to be the most actionable way, or a very actionable way for me and possibly for others to support and promote social justice and equity. And it's clear to me that evolving people's thinking and actions and hearts and minds is a path for both individual as well as for the greater good overall. Social justice, as I've thought through it, is a harbinger for where we want to focus as a society. And I think that these conversations like this and allyship overall are a great way for us to get there. I'm mindful, what today we're talking about fostering inclusion and justice in the workplace and today, and I'm also mindful of the need to do it systemically, potentially through teaching and learning programs in primary and secondary education. But that's a topic for another day. We're talking very much today about things we can do today, but we're also talking about how to influence future generations and thinking about how to influence future generations. And so I'm mindful of that as well. So let's go to your questions. Let me see. I've got to go to the Q&A area here. Wow, we've got several. Okay. All right. So why don't we start with, how would you suggest adapting these ideas to a county or state system where there are union considerations and limitations on how we can recruit for a diverse workforce? Great question.
Phil, you want to take that one, or would you like me to?
This is for either of you, please.
Sure. Dr. Hutchinson, why don't I give this floor to you, and then I'll color in a little bit from my perspective.
Okay. So, through our consulting firm, we work with a variety of governmental institutions, the city, county, public education institutions are one of our biggest clientele, actually. And there are huge limitations in each of these places. Obviously in K through 12 education, you're educating children and you're dealing with minors, and you've also got union issues. And then working with the city and the county and the state presents a whole another list of issues. And it's one of the first questions we get when we're talking to decision makers and they're trying to decide the parameters of what they can and can't do. And without getting into the specifics, because it is quite a detailed topic, but without getting into the specifics, I would say, as a broader statement, there's so much that we can do in every type of organization and every type of institution. And we can creatively think about the ways to make our institutions and our organizations more diverse, more inclusive, more equitable. It's been done before. There's models of these that we can look to. And we have a lot of best practices that are effective and that work. So the idea that there's limitations, legal limitations, and all sorts of other limitations, it can't be our we can't sort of lead with it, because we call that barrier thinking. It's all the reasons that we can't do it or we can't do it well enough. And those reasons will always exist and they'll always be different. But we really have to work creatively to work around those. And it's completely doable. And like I said, I'd love to get specific. It's very elaborate. It would take a much longer conversation to consult on, you know, the things that we can actually do at each of those levels. But I think hopefully, Philip, you agree with me that there's never a situation we walk into where we say there's nothing we can do here because of the limitations.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, and I think you summed it up well. I haven't been as exposed to some of those challenges at county or state systems because I've always worked in the private space. But if you are someone that is in the private space that is looking to maybe get started with developing an ERG, there's a wonderful resource that we've included. The Black Hat team at Airbnb did publish a version 1 of a employee resource group manual, how to get started. And those conversations do begin with understanding what the organization's goals are. And usually you can get that information by engaging with talent partners as well as human resources. And it's always great to invite your manager and, you know, ask them these questions in terms of what the organization is doing, because it's really helpful to kind of get their air cover and support, and also understand what kind of relationship and time commitments may be available to you to begin this journey.
Great, thank you. Another question, how can organizations make sure they are being fair when it comes to promotions and raises? I'm gonna whomever would like to respond, please do.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. It's tough to determine. Well, I actually want to answer this a little bit differently. Table stakes, each organization has their own approach to performance management. Everywhere that I've been, there's been you know, various levels of what's taken into account, what the frequency is, who's involved. Is it manager, skip level? Is it peers? And there's been various ways that this is done. But I actually want to suggest that, you know, the idea of fair is a really challenging one. And what I found is that when I've seen people be successful in advancing their career, they've really leaned into their understanding of what sponsor relationships look like. Unfortunately, I haven't seen anywhere where it's been truly just a meritocracy, where it's just input, output, and you're only being measured on what you're delivering. Everywhere I've been, organizations care how you delivered it. Did you bring people along with the journey? Are you creating value for the organization that's beyond the scope of your role and that actually touches other leaders in other parts of the organization? But I do want to sort of demystify like the differences between mentors and sponsors for a moment, because I think it's just so critical. It has been so valuable to me in my career. You know, a mentor, you know, is someone who can share their knowledge with others. It can be anyone with expertise. They provide guidance. They can offer you advice on how to expand your network. And that is very different than someone who's a senior leader with influence, who can use their social capital to accelerate, you know, their protege's career development. It's a very different thing when somebody actually chooses to extend their personal brand on your behalf and say, this is why this person should get a stretch career opportunity. This is why this person is ready for the next challenge and getting promoted within their organization. So if you are someone who's struggling and feels like maybe your work isn't being elevated or being stuck, I would challenge you to go through an exercise to evaluate who are my sponsors internal to my organization. You will also need sponsors outside of your organization, but particularly if you're trying to advance your career in terms of performance management, you really do need to be thoughtful about having sponsors within the organization, both within your vertical, and I would say also someone that's actually not within your vertical that can also expand influence and extend their brand on your behalf.
Thank you. Thank you. Carrie, can you elaborate on the distinction between calling in and calling out?
I would love to elaborate on that. And I just want to point folks to, if you are interested in really getting some training around that, entirely 100% free training to develop those skills. It's something that I focus on a lot in my training. You can find that on my website. And I should mention that as part of my accountability in this work, everything that I do, anything that I do for pay, I also do the equivalent for free. It's something that is important for any person who's serving as an ally across any social issue. But you can check that out for more detailed response. But in sum, the distinction between calling in and calling out is that they serve different purposes. Calling in is, well, I'll start with calling out. Calling out is for the purpose of distinguishing which behaviors, statements, comments will not be tolerated in a setting because they're unacceptable. Is to show solidarity with the folks who are being targeted based on those statements and behaviors, and it's to stop them from happening. And it's usually in situations where the person who's doing it is somewhat aware or is intending to be provocative or has a really different mindset about these things. And so the immediate goal is actually not to change the heart and mind of the individual that you're calling out. Calling out is absolutely necessary in many situations. But again, it serves a very specific purpose that is really different from calling in. Calling in is better used. It's a method that's better to select if you're dealing with somebody who really is either unaware of the problem they've created or the thing they've said or the transgression they've made. They're unaware of it, or they don't fully understand the impact, or they're interested and have the capacity to change. And when that's the case, we can really only grow this movement and develop our strength by drawing in more people who currently have a way of thinking that they're interested in learning a little bit more about in order to do better and to be better. And so in those situations, if we call out and we treat those folks aggressively, we run the risk of alienating them. And in fact, the pendulum effect will occur where they will be even more likely to be kind of recruited or persuaded by the other side. So we like to use calling in because it makes it practices the kind of inclusion that we're speaking of and the type that we're trying to create in the world around us by demonstrating skills, allowing for openness, as I reflected on earlier, making sure that we're not expecting perfection from everybody around us. We certainly don't expect that from ourselves, and really doing our best to educate people in our spheres of influence on things maybe that we've come into greater awareness about, and that can help them evolve in their thinking about these things. So that's the purpose of calling in. It's very different from calling out, and those are skill sets that it takes a long time to develop. I do a lot of practice with folks that I train, and we even cut right down to memorizing statements that you have in your back pocket for either of these situations. Because what happens when we're dealing with other human beings and we're triggered, our emotions tend to hijack our reasoning, and we don't have the capacity to come up with exactly the right statement. I'm sure everybody here can relate to that. And then we end up ruminating a long time about what we should have done or could have done to do our part and do the right thing. And if we prepare ourselves and learn a little bit more about how to deal with both call-in situations and call-out situations, we can really play our part and play a huge role in making social change by being equipped for those moments when they happen.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Another good question. How do you move for an employee? How do you move your company towards social justice?
Yeah, I'll speak on some of my experiences across different organizations. We leverage employee resource groups and the relationship with diversity, equity, and inclusion teams that were embedded within HR. And where ERGs were helpful is to sort of consolidate that feedback and work with members to determine what messages we wanted to elevate and what concerns we wanted to elevate and what solution proposals we would put forth. I always remind folks, if there's a challenge or something that you want to address, it's really difficult if you just throw it over the fence and say, please do something about this. I think it's always important to lead with solution proposals around what the organization can specifically do and some recommendations for how they can show up both for employees internally as well as external to the organization. And this is also important in terms of how you think about the design of an employee resource group. It wasn't just the co-leads that would be responsible for championing the causes of members. There would always be an executive sponsor. And that is usually someone who sits one or two levels away from the CEO within the organization that can actually surface, this feedback and surface those concerns so that those conversations can be elevated for E-teams to consider. The E-team being the executive leadership team.
Okay, thank you. So I'll read two more questions. There's many good questions here, but we have time for a couple more. What can you say about what more can you say about the components of an equity audit? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I was the one who mentioned the equity audit, so I can answer that. So an equity audit is a deep dive into the organization to get a baseline measure of how it's doing on issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and anti-racism, and then to, from that baseline measure, establish clear and concrete goals that can be measured over time in order to continue assessing, and as I mentioned, to continue developing and making improvements. So in the equity audit, well, you know, everybody does them differently. If you Google search equity audit, you'll find a ton of different entities that provide these. My firm is just one of them, and you can select a variety of different providers, but everyone approaches it a little bit differently. What we do is we try to look at all levels of the organization. So we look at folks at the very top of the hierarchy, upper management, to all the way to every employee in the entire organization, and really take a deep dive into their experiences in the organization. We look at a variety of measures about incidents in the organization. And this is where we get back to that question where somebody asked about sensitivities around state, local government, and public education. We have to be careful about how we ask these questions because it could create liabilities for our organization. So we're very cognizant of that as we're drafting our surveys for an organization. And so they participate heavily in the drafting of the survey. We have a lot of different questions that we like to ask. We curate those questions based on the nature of the industry and really take a deep dive to, like I said, develop that baseline measure of how they're doing, and then go back and remeasure over time and set some really concrete goals that typically the concrete goals we set are not ones that folks have heard of before, and they're not ones that are obvious without a little bit of training. So we like to do training alongside an equity audit so that people are getting up to speed on why we're asking these questions, what they mean, and what they can do about the answers.
Okay, thank you. So our last question, and a bit related, do you have any recommendations for what to do when you see a supervisor who has bias and they won't acknowledge it?
I'll jump in on this one. And specifically, when I was the co-lead, I had a member who had shared that they were having this kind of an experience. And what we tried to do is create different interventions through unconscious bias training. So this is an opportunity where talent partners would work with ERGs to help champion these programs. And we did our best to not make them optional. Some of this became mandatory for people managers. And that was one way that we tried to help people develop those skill sets so that they can be better managers. And then also there may be scenarios where it just doesn't work out between an employee and a manager for those very reasons. And that's where I think having a network of people connected to different parts of an organization can help you with some of that mobility, where you may have lateral opportunities or maybe hopefully promotional opportunities that can allow you to continue to bring your authentic self to work and continue to progress in your career.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you all for your questions. There are many good questions here. We have limited time, so we've asked those that we can, but we really appreciate your participation. Before we end our session, I'd like to ask each of you, both Carrie and Phil, if you can share one last piece of feedback for our audience. So in 60 seconds or less, what's the one thing you really want our audience to have as a takeaway today? Carrie, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So a lot of my information today was about the fact that folks don't always know what to do and where to begin. And that the feeling of being overwhelmed is common. We all share it. It's part of the human condition. And if I were to offer one big takeaway that I want everyone to leave with today, it would be a quote that I like to use at the end of all of our trainings, which is, "You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." So you're not expected to solve racism. You're not expected to solve sexism, but just because those things are not within your capacity does not mean that you get to do nothing. We all have a role to play. We all share the values that are important to us, and we all complain about the world the way it is. And if we're doing those things, then we each have a role to play. And I want to empower everybody to be able to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. Phil, your thoughts?
I would just add that, again, most of the continued growth that I experienced spiritually, professionally, has come from deepening my relationships with the people and being open and having experience by going out and learning. So definitely do that work. There's resources that are shared out as a part of this presentation. I do want to highlight for anybody who's really interested in ERG work, because I think it's a really powerful instrument, not to just check a box, but to also create opportunities for real career growth, executive visibility, and also expanding sort of your aperture of what's possible to influence the products and services that your organization builds for the communities they serve.
Thank you. Thank you both. That's great information, and I wish we could go on and discuss it, but I am encouraged that it will be a topic that I and many of us will remain mindful of, particularly with the new information that you have shared. So on behalf of the University of California, I want to thank you for joining our UC Alumni Career Network webinar. It's been a pleasure to connect with each of you virtually. We appreciate you making time for this event and also for your support of the University of California. We hope you've gained a deeper insight into the topic and have gotten valuable advice and help for your career, to help to advance your career. I'd like to thank our panelists. Thank you for your time, your generosity, your commitment to the University of California as well. The insights, advice you shared, and this forum make me especially proud to be part of our UC community. For the panelists and for the viewers, I hope you will take a few minutes to provide feedback on today's event at the Survey Gizmo. That link will appear on your screen after the webinar. Your feedback will be used to help determine topics for future sessions. In addition to the many ways alumni can give back, we invite you to sign up for the Alumni Advocates as an alumni advocate at the UC Advocate Network at UCAN. There's a link in the chat where you can sign up. UCAN is a digital grassroots community that focuses on issues that matter to UC staff, to students, to alumni, to faculty, and to more. You can advocate speaking out in Sacramento and Washington, D.C., helping the University of California through actions like signing petitions, tweeting support, emailing elected officials. All of this helps shape thinking about and policy for UC, California, and more. By signing up, you will receive alerts when to take action, and you'll be given resources that will help you take those actions. We hope to see you again in March at our next UC Alumni Career Network webinar. That webinar will feature our University of California President, Michael Drake, who will speak on the topic of health equity. It is certain to be a great event. You can visit ucal.uc or .us. We'll put this in the chat as well, but you can visit ucal.us/ACN for more details on upcoming events and episodes. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. So it was very, informative, terrific conversation. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.